What happened was I had done a screenplay about a young graduate student who genetically engineered a single dinosaur from fossil remains, and the screenplay didn't work. It was too fantastic a event to be kept secret, which is what happened in that story. And I couldn't really, I mean, the big problem always with these creatures is once you have them, then what do you do with them? What is the story after they exist? And it wasn't very satisfactory in that way, and I gave it up. The other thing was at that time that I really had trouble believing that this might ever happen. I mean, of course it's a fantasy, but I had trouble for myself believing that it might be true. And in the next few years, there was more and more research that suggested that it wasn't so unlikely. And I began to take it in that way more seriously.
Animals that went extinct millions of years ago, like dinosaurs, left their blueprints behind for us to find. We just had to know where to look.
The other thing that happened was I began to feel that if I was going to do this story, I'd better do it soon. I was then in my middle 40s, and it was starting to seem like a kind of inherently juvenile fantasy story, no matter how you cut it, which I think it still has those aspects which are very pleasant. So I finally sat down and really tried to do it and do it as a book. The solution, which at the time I had found very unsatisfactory, was to make it a theme park. And the reason why the dinosaurs were set in a theme park was just a sort of logical problem. Although I by then believed that it was possible to genetically engineer these creatures, or that eventually it would be possible, I couldn't see who would pay for it. You know, who's gonna, because it's not a cure for cancer, you know, I mean, it's very entertaining. And the only thing I could think of was that it would be some form of entertainment. In terms of the actual writing, it occurred around the time my daughter was born, and then I bought a lot of stuffed toys, and they were all dinosaurs because that was kind of what was available at that time. And my wife didn't like it. She had a color scheme for the nursery, and I was disrupting it, and there were all these large, brightly colored animals. And so we had a kind of agreement that I wouldn't buy any more, but then I bought some more. And it was clearly obsessional. And I had to begin to wonder at some point what it was about dinosaurs that fascinated me so much, or why I thought that they were so tied to childhood. And it was some of those concerns found their way into the book. Of course the characters have some relationship to me.
So you two dig up dinosaurs?
Stendhal said that fiction is disguised autobiography, or something to that effect, and I think it is. But in general, I prefer to take what is already true, if I can. I don't know how you would get the reality without taking the reality. So in Jurassic Park, I think it's true that all the characters are based, even loosely, on real people.
And even the word raptor means bird of prey.
That doesn't look very scary.
The most obvious one and the best known is Alan Grant, who is Jack Horner, who was an advisor on the film, eventually.
Why would they care what we think?
What kind of park is this? It's right up your alley.
Hammond, I suppose, is the least based on anybody, and certainly he has that quality in the novel anyway, which is a certain unscrupulousness. And he was, in my conception, a much darker character than what Stephen finally made. I really wanted to do the dark side of Walt Disney, and Stephen is, I guess, more forgiving. It seems to me that we live in a society in which technology is continuously presented as wonderful.
Oh, God, it's cool to compartmentalize inside.
We are less exposed to the negative aspects of technology, which are inevitably there.
I hate computers.
Feelings mutual.
One of my interests is to provide that kind of balance to these notions that cell phones and faxes, it's all wonderful, it's great. Isn't it fabulous that we all have computers? And, well, yes and no is my response.
God damn it! Hate this hacker crap!
I was particularly interested in that in working on Jurassic Park, that aspect of what are the negative parts. Because in talking with the people who are doing this kind of research, What I was hearing was that the most responsible of them were deciding not to proceed down certain lines of inquiry, which is really a new phase in science. I mean, traditionally in science, what the scientists themselves have said is, I might as well do it because if I don't, someone else will. It is going to happen inevitably. And I think there's a recognition that it's not so inevitable, and that it's quite conceivable that if I don't do this research, neither will anyone else. It's simply too dangerous.
Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
Ordinarily, my working method is to do years of research. In the first book, it was probably about 10 years from start to finish, of which maybe 3 years were really writing and the other period of time was accumulating. And I, of course, wasn't only doing that during that time. But I allow myself a very long gestation period in that sense. I actually thought it would be possible to do a good movie, but I thought it would be dauntingly expensive. And I couldn't have any confidence in the late 1980s when I was doing this. That I couldn't have any confidence that anyone would decide that dinosaurs were sufficiently interesting to spend a lot of money on them. Turned out someone did.
We've been in pre-production for 50 million years on this movie, Jurassic Park, by golly.
I think Stephen was the first person I met in the movie business. It was a very odd thing. It was in 1970, and Universal had bought the Andromeda strain, but they hadn't begun production. And I was at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, and one day I just drove up to Universal and met the production person who was supervising the project. And she said, "Would you like to see the studio?" I'd never seen a movie studio. I had no real idea. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, we have this really talented young man that we think is very wonderful named Steven Spielberg." And they had him come, and he took me around the studio and showed me what it was. And he was about to do a Night Gallery episode with Joan Crawford. That was going to be his first studio work. So, the first person I ever met.
Cut, print, great, great.
What I remember is that I had a discussion with Steven, and he said he didn't want to do a sequel, and I said that was fine with me. And then at a certain point, all those ideas changed. Then it became clear that there was going to be a sequel. And at that point, I said to Steven, well, I'll do a book and you'll do whatever you want in the movie. It had that sort of loose quality to me. The second one was shorter to finish because for me, I never conceived of it as a project that began without antecedents. It obviously had antecedents, and it was the only project that I've ever worked on where I knew there would be a movie. There would be a movie.
Welcome to Jurassic Park. I just had to hear that again.
I was actually interested to write a sequel because I'd never done it. And I think as Stephen was, very propelled by the enthusiasm of kids.
Yeah.
And also, at least for me, teachers were saying, how about a sequel because, the kids will pay attention to this and we can use it to, they were using the first book to teach all kinds of subjects. And I actually thought that was an interesting aspect and had some correspondence with various teachers groups to say, this is probably going to happen, what subjects would you like covered? But that didn't turn out to be very helpful because in the end I turned to a pretty complex set of problems in chaos theory that had to do with extinction, which I think is well beyond high school students, but that's the way it is.
And now it's only a matter of time before this lost world is found and pillaged.
I think my way of looking at movies that are based on books that I've done is in part the experience of having that happen many different times, and in part the experience of having done it with other people. When I was directing other people's books, I was not enthusiastic about the author visiting the set, and I didn't really want to hear what the author had to say about the changes that I was making. And so I'm sensitive to that, when I'm at the other end of the stick. I think that also there's a practical aspect, which is that they really are different media. And what my wish always is that it be a good movie in its own terms, and that it'd be a good example of the director's work. I think that's all that you can look for. And to wish for some sort of slavish fidelity to the book, I think, is unwise. I've felt some of the movies were too faithful to the book, and I wish they had departed more. And in other cases, I'd wish they hadn't departed so much.
Before they have to react to the wrecks coming out, not to each other.
But in any case, I think it's important that the director make his movie and not make my book. And I think that's really important. I don't actually have a lot of sympathy with the authors who say, you know, they took the book and changed it. I mean, it's a very different form. And it follows different rules, it has a different kind of timing, and it's just inevitably, it's got to change. So what you hope for is a good movie. I was known as the author of the Andromeda Strain, which was something I did in my 20s. And nothing else ever had that degree of public attention. It seemed like, and the years were going by, and I was getting tired of being the author of the Andromeda Strain. I was getting old, and it was starting to be a tag that was going to follow me, you know, like some kind of increasingly tired old animal, you know, hooked on my foot. So it was a great relief to be known as the author of Jurassic Park instead. All the time that I was working on the book, at least, I was really trying to understand what the fascination is. And I went through all the usual theories, you know, that they're interesting because they're so huge, that they're interesting because they have complicated names, that they're interesting because they're gigantic, menacing things like parents, you know, which are very large from the standpoint of a child, that there's some kind of Freudian association.
Gallimimus.
For the child to learn the name, these complicated names, as a way to control something. They're fascinating because they're extinct. I ran through everything that I could think of, and I decided that nobody knows.
This park was not built to cater only for the super rich. Everyone in the world has the right to enjoy these animals.
You know, one day I was in a museum, and there was a little kid who couldn't have been more than 2 or 2 and a half, watching a slideshow. It was the kind of child who probably wasn't even in preschool yet. So, you know, there isn't a kind of kid culture that's taking it over. I don't know where it's coming from. And the slides would be up there, and the kid would scream, "Tyrannosaurus! Stegosaurus!" You know, and all for an hour. And I just sat there thinking, what is it? I don't think anybody knows. Dong Zimeng, who is the head of the Institute of Paleontology in Beijing and is the person who has identified more dinosaurs than any other person in history. He's identified 32, and there's only 700 odd that are known, named a dinosaur for me, or I don't know how you say it, for me, after me. It's called Bienosaurus crichtoni, and it's interesting because it's actually named for 2 living people, which is unusual. It's named for Dr. Bien, who was the person who actually found the material in 1938, and it was brought back to Beijing, but then never examined because of the intervening war and all the events subsequent to that. And then the species name is my name, and he said he did it because my writing is so popular in China and because it's had such an effect on the field, he thinks. So I've had most of my life as an academic person. Even the time that I spent working in films is still, I tend to be the sort of, you know, the one who doesn't want so many explosions, I guess. And so for me, I mean, to have a dinosaur named after you is just, it's really wonderful.
Bye.